The call came at midnight. Not just late night casual, not the kind of I couldn't sleep so I called type of thing. No. This was the kind of call that splits your life into before and after. My phone lit up against the darkness of my room, and when I saw my mom's name on the screen, my chest tightened. She never called me this late, not unless it was something serious. I answered with that kind of groggy fear, the kind where you already know you're about to hear something you can't unhear. Her voice cracked. "Marissa, it's your dad. He's in trouble again. Again." That word hit me like a slap, because again meant this wasn't the first time. And somewhere in the back of my head, I already knew exactly what kind of trouble it was. You grow up in Las Vegas, and you learn quickly that trouble usually has neon lights attached to it. Casinos, debts, promises made in smoke-filled back rooms. My dad had always been that guy, the one who swore his luck was about to change, who promised one more win would fix everything. But luck doesn't fix anything. It just digs the hole deeper. I sat up in bed, blanket falling to the floor. "What happened, Mom?" Her silence said it all. Then the whisper, "He owes people money, a lot. And these aren't people you can just ignore." The room felt colder. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, trying to keep her voice from slipping away. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew it didn't matter. 50,000, she said. Her words splintered. "And they want it soon. 50,000. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. That was more than tuition, more than the rent for a whole year, more than I could imagine ever having in my 22 years of life. My first thought wasn't about the number, though. It was about them, the people who wanted it. Because in Vegas, there are casinos, and then there are the ones who operate behind them. You can play the slots, or you can owe the kind of men whose names never show up in the neon lights. And if you owed them, you paid, one way or another." "Marissa," my mom whispered, her voice trembling. "They said if we don't pay, they have another way." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "What do you mean?" They said you could make this go away." My whole body froze. I felt every muscle lock, like the words themselves had chains attached. "Me? What do I have to do with this?" But she didn't answer. Just the sound of her crying, muffled, like she was trying not to wake the neighbors. That silence told me more than any words could. I didn't need her to spell it out, I knew. And the knowledge sat in my stomach like lead. I stared at the shadows on my ceiling, thinking of the life I thought I had. College, shifts at the diner, plans that felt so small now. Because in one phone call, everything I thought was mine, my future, my freedom, suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Do you know that feeling? When your whole body knows the danger before your brain has time to process it? That was me, gripping the phone in the dark, trying not to let the fear swallow me whole. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every sound outside felt like footsteps. Every car passing by sounded like someone pulling up to my door. And somewhere, out in that desert city that never sleeps, there were men waiting for us, waiting for me. I remember thinking, this is how it starts. Not with drama, not with flashing lights. Just a phone call at midnight, and suddenly you're no longer safe in your own skin. And the worst part? I didn't even know yet how deep it was going to cut. Morning came too quickly. I had barely closed my eyes when sunlight crept through the blinds, painting thin stripes across the carpet. My head was heavy, but not from lack of sleep. More like the weight of everything I'd heard in that midnight call. I drove straight to my parents' house, the little stucco one just off Tropicana Avenue, the one that always smelled faintly of fried onions and cigarette smoke. It should have felt like home. But that morning, when I opened the door, it felt like stepping into a room where everyone had already decided not to say the truth out loud. Dad was at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee as if the dark liquid might have the answers. Mom hovered at the counter, twisting a dish towel in her hands. Neither looked up when I walked in. "Morning," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. Dad flinched just slightly, then muttered, "Morning." Without looking at me, I sat down across from him, the chair legs scraping loud against the tile. 50,000, Dad. Really?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. He just stared deeper into that mug. Mom spoke up, her voice quiet. "Marissa, it's not his fault. Not his fault," I snapped. "He walked into the casino, didn't he?" He put down the bets. Nobody made him. She looked away, eyes brimming. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." "Then make me understand." The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Dad's hands trembled slightly as he set the mug down. Finally, he spoke. "I thought I could win it back. I thought if I just had one more good night, I could cover the bills. You don't know the pressure I'm under." I laughed bitterly. "Pressure?" "You're not the one they're coming after now, are you?" He looked up at me then, and the shame in his eyes almost stopped me. Almost. "They asked about me," I said quietly. "They want me," Mom gasped, covering her mouth, but she didn't deny it. That silence again. That silence that told me everything I needed to know. I pushed back from the table so hard the chair toppled. "So what, Dad? You gamble our lives away, and then what? They think they can take me as payment?" He looked away, his shoulders caving. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just ashamed. He was afraid enough to let me carry his mistake. The rest of that day blurred into fragments. Neighbors dropping by, pretending not to notice the tension in our voices. My mom making lunch we didn't touch. Dad chain-smoking on the porch, pacing back and forth. Dinner was worse. We sat around the table, the three of us, plates full but untouched. The clink of a fork against porcelain was the loudest sound in the room. I stared at them both. "Say something," I demanded, but they didn't. My mom kept her head down, tears sliding silently onto her plate. Dad stared past me, eyes glazed, lost somewhere far away. And that's when it hit me. They weren't going to save me. They couldn't. Or maybe they wouldn't. Do you know that moment when the people who are supposed to protect you suddenly feel like strangers? That's what that dinner table felt like. A fracture running right through the middle, splitting us apart. I left before dessert, not that there was any. Slamming the door behind me, I stood on the porch, sucking in the cool desert night air like I was drowning. I had always believed family meant safety, that no matter how bad things got, we'd figure it out together. But that night, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes family is the first place you get betrayed. And the silence, that awful, heavy silence, was the proof. I wish I could tell you I had more time to think, to breathe, to plan. But in situations like this, time isn't yours anymore. It belongs to whoever's knocking. It happened 2 nights later. I was in my parents' living room, scrolling on my phone with the TV humming quietly in the background. Mom was pacing. Dad was outside on the porch, a cigarette glowing in the dark like a tiny warning light. And then it came. The knock. Not a polite knock. Not the kind neighbors use when they drop by with pie. This was hard, deliberate, measured. Like each pound on the door carried its own threat, Mom froze. Her hands twisted in front of her. Dad didn't move either, but I could see the outline of his shoulders through the window, his back stiffened, cigarette trembling slightly. The knock came again, louder. Something inside me snapped. "I'll get it," I said, though my heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear myself. When I opened the door, they were standing there. 2 men, both in dark suits, ties loose, like they had somewhere better to be, but decided to stop by and ruin our lives first. One was taller, with slicked back hair and eyes that didn't blink enough. The other was shorter, heavier, with a smirk that told me he enjoyed this. "You Marissa?" the tall one asked. His voice was smooth, like velvet stretched too tight. I hesitated. "Who's asking?" He smiled thinly. "We work with your father. He owes us. You know that." Behind me, Mom whispered, "Don't, please." The shorter one stepped closer, his cologne sharp, almost suffocating. "We're here to discuss alternatives. Alternatives." The word felt like poison. Dad finally came in from the porch, face pale, voice shaking. I told you I'd get the money. I just need more time." The tall one didn't even look at him. His eyes stayed on me. "Time's not what you've got. But you?" He tilted his head, still watching me. "You could be the solution." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you mean?" The smirk deepened on the shorter man's face. "You marry into our family, debt's gone, clean slate." The words landed heavy in the room, louder than the TV, louder than Mom's muffled sob. Dad said nothing. Nothing. My chest burned. "That's not an option." The tall one chuckled softly, like I'd just said something naive. "Everything's an option when you're desperate." I looked at Dad, waiting for him to stand up to defend me, to say no, but he didn't. His silence screamed louder than any words could. The shorter man leaned in closer, his voice low but sharp. "You'd be taken care of. No more debt, no more threats. Think about it. Your father's life, your mother's peace, all on your shoulders." My shoulders trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "Get out!" They didn't flinch. They just exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that said, "She's going to regret this." Finally, the tall one tapped the door frame lightly, almost playful. "We'll be back." And just like that, they walked off into the desert night, their footsteps fading but their threats still ringing in my ears. When the door shut, the silence collapsed around us. Mom broke first, sobbing into her hands. Dad sank into a chair, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it, though he had let it happen. I stood frozen, my heart still racing. Their words replayed over and over. Marry into our family, debt's gone. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about control, about taking me, my freedom, my future, and turning it into currency. And my own father had let the suggestion hang in the air, unchallenged. Do you know what it feels like when your body is in a room but your soul feels cornered? That was me that night. I locked my bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed my hands against my face until I couldn't tell if it was sweat or tears running down. My phone sat on the nightstand, glowing. For the first time, I thought about using it for more than texts or scrolling, because if they were going to come back, I needed proof. I needed something stronger than silence. But that decision, that spark of defiance, came later. Right then, all I felt was trapped. Because once they knock, you can't unhear it. You can't go back to being safe. I didn't leave my room for hours after they left. The knock, the smirks, the words. They sat heavy in my chest like a weight I couldn't push off. When I finally came out, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Dad sat on the couch, staring at the TV that wasn't even turned on. Mom was at the kitchen table, her head resting in her hands, shoulders shaking softly. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask how they could let two strangers stand in our living room and say those things without fighting back. But my throat felt tight, like the words would only choke me. Instead, I said the first thing that came out. "So, that's it?" "That's the plan now?" Dad didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the blank screen. Mom lifted her head, eyes red. "Marissa, please. They're dangerous. We can't make them angry." "Angry?" I laughed bitterly. "They just told me I could marry my way out of this debt like I'm some kind of bargaining chip. And you? I turned to Dad. You didn't even say no. His jaw tightened. His voice was low, rough. What do you want me to say? That I can fix it? That I can magically come up with $50,000? I can't. The words cut sharper than I expected. He wasn't just admitting defeat. He was laying the burden at my feet. Mom reached for me across the table. We don't want this for you. You have to believe that, I pulled back. But you're not stopping it either. The silence that followed was worse than any shouting match could have been. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. Choices ran through my head like a broken record. Stay quiet and pray for a miracle. Give in and sacrifice myself for them. Or find another way. But another way meant risk. It meant stepping into a fight I didn't know how to win. I thought about the life I wanted, college, a career, the freedom to choose who I loved, where I lived, who I became. Every picture of my future blurred under the weight of this one impossible choice. And yet, the more I thought about it, the clearer something became. If I stayed silent, I'd lose everything anyway. I remembered the look on their faces, the men at the door. They weren't going to stop. Silence would only feed them. That's when a thought, small but sharp, cut through the fear. What if silence isn't my only option? I looked at my phone again, a tool I used every day without thinking, calls, texts, photos. But what if it could be more? What if it could capture the truth they tried to hide? The idea terrified me, but for the first time in days, it also made me feel like I wasn't completely powerless. Lying back on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me, I whispered to myself, I won't let them decide my life. And though my voice shook, it was the first thing that felt solid. The impossible choice wasn't really between sacrifice and silence. It was between surrender and defiance. And that night, I decided I'd rather risk everything fighting than lose myself by giving in. The first time I hit record, my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. It felt ridiculous, like this tiny rectangle of glass and metal could stand up against men who broke bones for a living. But it was all I had. I slipped the phone into my hoodie pocket, the voice memo app glowing for a moment before the screen went dark. The red line crept across in silence, proof that I wasn't just imagining this nightmare. I was documenting it. 2 days after their first visit, they came back, the same knock. The same weight pressing down on my chest. Dad froze on the couch, cigarette smoke curling around him like a shield he couldn't step out from. Mom whispered a prayer under her breath. And me? I pressed my hand over the phone in my pocket and opened the door. The tall one smirked when he saw me. Smart girl, he said. Answering so quick. His words made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stand there, every nerve screaming. The shorter man stepped in, his eyes scanning the living room like it already belonged to him. So, have we thought about our arrangement? I could feel the phone recording humming silently against my hip. My voice came out steadier than I felt. There's no arrangement. The tall one laughed softly, leaning against the door frame like this was casual, like we were talking about dinner plans. You think you've got options? You don't. It's either money you don't have, or a future you can't refuse, I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms, and said nothing. Mom started crying, muttering that we just needed more time. Dad nodded along, words spilling out about promises he couldn't keep, and I stood there silent, letting the phone capture it all. Their threats, their manipulation, the way they tried to fold my life into their debt. When they left, the silence felt heavier than before. Dad collapsed back into his chair, his eyes glassy. Mom pulled me into her arms, sobbing into my hair, but I wasn't crying. Not anymore. Because I had something now, proof. That night, lying in bed, I played the recording back. Their voices filled the room, sharp and undeniable. Every word was a weapon, but this time, the blade wasn't in their hands, it was in mine. Do you know that feeling when fear starts to shift into something else? It doesn't vanish. It doesn't make you brave overnight, but it hardens. It turns into resolve. I started carrying my phone everywhere, the app always one tap away. At work, at home, even walking down the street, I felt like I was living in two worlds. The normal one everyone else saw, and the one I was secretly building, word by word, proof by proof. Each time I recorded them, I felt a little stronger, a little less trapped. One night after another tense visit, I sat in the dark with Ethan, my boyfriend, the one person outside this house I could trust. I played him the recordings, his jaw clenched, eyes burning. "They can't get away with this," he said. "That's the point," I whispered. "They won't." He grabbed my hand. "Then we'll take this as far as it has to go." For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. Still, the fear lingered. Every knock made me jump. Every shadow on the street looked like a threat. But now, when the fear pressed down, I pressed back, with the knowledge that I wasn't silent anymore. The recorder wasn't just capturing voices, it was capturing the moment I stopped being a victim. And deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, in the most ordinary place you could imagine. A corner cafe on Charleston Boulevard, the kind with chipped mugs and old jazz humming from a speaker overhead. But that day, it became the stage for something far from ordinary. Ethan sat across from me, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't touched. My phone was between us on the table, the recordings stacked inside like bullets in a chamber. He leaned in, voice low. "You're sure about this?" I nodded, though my heart thumped so hard it rattled my chest. "If I don't face them, they'll never stop. They'll keep circling until there's nothing left of me." The bell above the door jingled, and just like that, they were there. The tall one and the short one, suits sharp against the cafe's warm light. Their eyes swept the room, then locked on me. The tall one smiled thinly, sliding into the booth beside me without asking. The shorter one leaned against the counter, arms crossed, like he owned the place. "Marissa," the tall one said, his voice smooth as ever. "We were starting to think you'd forgotten us." My hands trembled under the table, but I hit the button on my phone anyway. Record. The red line crept forward. "I didn't forget," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I just wanted to talk somewhere public." His smile widened. "Smart girl. Safety in numbers, right?" Ethan shifted, his jaw tight. "She's not here alone." The tall man ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. "So, have you decided?" I swallowed hard. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. I decided I'm not for sale, not for 50,000, not for anything. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The short man's smirk faltered. He leaned closer, voice sharp. "Careful, sweetheart. You think you're making a choice, but you're just making it harder for everyone, for your father, for your mother." My blood boiled. "No. You're the ones making it harder. You walk into our lives, you threaten us, you try to buy me like I'm property, and you expect me to just say yes?" The cafe went quiet. Even the jazz seemed to pause mid-note. The tall one's eyes narrowed, his smile fading for the first time. "You're braver than you look." But bravery doesn't pay debts. That's when Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady and loud enough for the room to hear. "Maybe not. But the police might be interested in your business model." The short man barked a laugh, but it sounded forced. "Police? What police? You think anyone's going to believe you?" That was my cue. My fingers brushed the phone on the table, and I turned the screen toward them. The red recording line blinked like a heartbeat. "They don't have to believe me," I said. "They'll believe you." Every word you've said, every threat, every time you came to our house, for the first time I saw it, fear flashing across their faces. Just for a second, but it was there. The power shifted, subtle but real. "You wouldn't dare," the tall one hissed. "I already did," I whispered. The room felt electric, the air charged like a storm waiting to break. The other customers pretended not to notice, but I could feel their eyes flicking toward us, curiosity simmering. Ethan's hand brushed mine under the table, grounding me. "You should leave," he told them. For a moment, it looked like they might explode, the facade cracking. But then the tall one stood, straightening his suit. He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, Marissa." I held his gaze. "So are you." They left without another word, the bell above the door jingling again as it closed behind them. I exhaled so sharply it felt like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Ethan grabbed my hand, squeezing tight. "You did it," he said. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because men like that don't just walk away. They retreat, they regroup, they come back harder. Still, for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear, power. Do you know that feeling when you finally stop running and face the storm head on? That's what the cafe felt like. Ordinary walls, chipped mugs, soft jazz, and me, reclaiming a piece of myself they thought they owned. And though I knew the fight wasn't finished, I also knew this. They had underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. After the cafe, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd back off. That the recordings were enough to scare them, that they'd vanish into the neon shadows of Vegas and find some other unlucky soul to squeeze. But fear doesn't disappear that easily. It lingers, and in Vegas, it multiplies. For a few days, the house was quiet, too quiet. Dad smoked less, like he believed silence meant safety. Mom clung to me constantly, urging me not to leave the house. Ethan checked in every hour, his protective side kicking in stronger than ever. But my gut told me calm wasn't peace. It was a pause before the storm, and I was right. It happened on a Thursday night. I was coming home from a late shift at the diner, exhausted, smelling like French fries and burnt coffee. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across our front yard. I reached the porch and froze. The door was cracked open, my stomach dropped. Slowly, I pushed it wider. Inside, Dad was at the table again, but he wasn't alone. Across from him sat the tall one, suit crisp, smile sharp as glass. And on the couch, the short one lounged like he owned the place, flipping through one of Mom's magazines. My heart pounded. "What are you doing here?" The tall one looked up, his eyes glinting. "Relax, Marissa. We're just having a conversation with your father." Dad's face told a different story, pale, sweaty, guilty. I turned on him, my voice sharp. "Dad, what did you do?" He couldn't meet my eyes. The silence stretched until it snapped. "I told them about the recordings," he whispered. The words punched the air from my lungs. "You what?" My voice cracked, fury bubbling hot in my chest. The short one chuckled, tossing the magazine aside. "Daddy here thought he could cut a deal. Give us what we want, and maybe we forget the little stunt at the cafe." I stared at Dad, disbelief burning. "You sold me out." He buried his face in his hands. "I didn't know what else to do. They said they'd kill me." I wanted to scream, to shake him, to ask how he could choose his survival over mine. But before I could, the tall one stood, sliding his hands into his pockets. "See, Marissa, this is why family can't always be trusted. They crack under pressure. But you?" He tilted his head, studying me. "You're different. You fight, and I admire that." I clenched my fists. "You're not getting anything from me." He smiled, cold and slow. Oh, I think we already did. Because now we know exactly how to break you. Ethan appeared in the doorway then, chest heaving, eyes blazing. You need to leave now. The short one laughed, standing up lazily. Or what? You'll call the cops? Go ahead. Let's see who they believe. The sweet daughter with a wild imagination, or the father who admits he's neck-deep in debt. For a second I thought Ethan might swing. His fists were clenched, shoulders tense, but the tall one raised a hand, stopping him. Not here, not tonight. We'll be seeing you again. They left as smoothly as they arrived, slipping into the night like shadows. The door slammed shut behind them, and the silence that followed was worse than their threats. I turned on Dad, my voice shaking with rage. How could you? After everything, they threatened me, they wanted to own me, and you helped them. Tears filled his eyes, but I couldn't care. I thought I was saving us, he said weakly. No, you were saving yourself. I stormed out, slamming my bedroom door so hard the walls shook. Ethan followed, sitting beside me on the bed. I buried my face in my hands, the betrayal cutting deeper than any debt collectors ever could. Do you know what it feels like when the one person you're supposed to trust the most becomes the reason you're not safe? That's what betrayal is. It's not strangers at your door. It's the man who raised you, choosing his survival over your freedom. That night, as I replayed the recordings, a new clarity settled in. The fight wasn't just against them anymore. It was against the fracture in my own family, against the weakness that let them in. And that betrayal? It wasn't going to break me. It was going to make me ruthless. Because if I couldn't count on my father to protect me, then I'd protect myself. The night after the betrayal, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk with my phone lit up in front of me, scrolling through the recordings, each one like a dagger I refused to put down. Every threat, every smirk, every word they thought would break me. It was all there. And now, so was the truth about my father. Ethan paced the room, his sneakers squeaking against the old carpet. You can't stay here anymore, he said firmly. Not with him. Not with them knowing everything, I wanted to argue. To cling to the walls of the house I grew up in, the place that was supposed to mean safety. But he was right. That safety had been shattered the moment Dad opened his mouth. Still, leaving wasn't enough. Running wasn't enough. I needed to end this. I stared at the phone, the glowing red icons lined up like ammunition. What if this is enough? I asked softly. Ethan stopped pacing. You mean the recordings? I nodded. It's not just my word against theirs anymore. It's proof. Every visit, every demand. Even Dad admitting the debt. Ethan's jaw tightened. So we take it to the police. The idea terrified me. Men like them didn't just disappear when you filed a report. They pushed back, hard. But what choice did I have? Stay silent, and I'd lose everything. Speak up, and at least I'd go down fighting. The next morning I packed a small bag, clothes, charger, the essentials. Ethan waited outside in his car, his fingers drumming the steering wheel. I slipped my phone into my pocket, the recordings heavy even though they were nothing but data. Mom cried when I told her I was leaving. She clutched my hands, whispering, "Be careful, baby." They don't play fair. Dad stood in the doorway, guilt etched across his face. He didn't say anything. Maybe there was nothing left for him to say. Ethan drove us across town, past the glittering lights of the Strip, to a quiet police station tucked between two beige office buildings. The air smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. My legs shook as I walked inside, clutching my phone like it was the only weapon I had. The officer behind the desk raised an eyebrow as I explained. At first, I saw disbelief flicker in his eyes. Another debt story, another messy family. But then I pressed play, the cafe, the threats, the deal. My father's confession. Their voices filled the sterile room, undeniable. The officer sat up straighter. You have all of this recorded? I nodded, my throat dry. Stay here, he said, and disappeared down a hallway. Minutes later, 2 detectives came in, notepad in hand. They asked for names, dates, details. I gave them everything, my voice shaking but steady enough. Ethan sat beside me, his hand brushing mine every so often, grounding me. By the time we left, the sun was setting. The city glowed with its usual neon bravado, but for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the darkness didn't own me anymore. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. Reporting them was one thing. Surviving the fallout was another. That night, Ethan and I sat on his apartment balcony, the desert air warm against our skin. He looked at me, eyes steady. "You did the right thing," I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening just a little. "Then why do I feel like the fight's only starting?" Because it was. Do you know that moment when you finally put your plan in motion, but your heart knows the storm hasn't passed yet? That was me, staring at the city lights, clutching my phone, and waiting for the next knock. The recordings were no longer just evidence. They were my shield, my sword, my line in the sand. And I wasn't backing down. The day of the hearing came faster than I could prepare for it. One moment, I was sitting on Ethan's couch, trying to distract myself with reruns and cold pizza, and the next, I was standing outside the Clark County Courthouse, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The building loomed above me, all sharp lines and glass that reflected the scorching Nevada sun. My chest tightened. This wasn't just a building. It was the line between silence and justice. Ethan squeezed my hand. "You're ready," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his worry. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. The hallways echoed with footsteps and murmurs, every sound magnified by my nerves. When we entered the courtroom, my stomach dropped. They were already there. The tall one sat at the defendant's table, posture relaxed, like he'd been here before. The short one leaned back in his chair, smirk firmly in place, as though the judge and jury were just another audience to charm. And beside them, my father. My throat tightened. He wouldn't look at me. He just sat hunched, avoiding my gaze, like a man who had traded his soul for one more breath. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My legs felt like lead, but I stood anyway. The gavel struck, sharp and final. The prosecutor began, outlining the charges: extortion, coercion, conspiracy. The words sounded heavy, but the defendants looked unbothered, as if none of it could touch them. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand, palms sweaty, knees trembling. The bailiff swore me in and I sat down, heart pounding. The prosecutor asked me to recount everything, from the midnight call to the cafe confrontation. My voice shook, but I forced each word out, painting the story piece by piece. Finally he asked, "Do you have proof of these claims?" I pulled out my phone. For weeks, it had felt like nothing but a lifeline, a desperate shield. Now it was my weapon. I connected it to the courtroom's audio system, and with a trembling finger, I hit play. The room filled with their voices. "You marry into our family, debt's gone, clean slate." The tall one shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. "Careful, sweetheart. You think you're making a choice, but you're just making it harder for everyone." The short one's smirk faltered. Then came the cafe recording, Ethan's voice cutting through, steady and sure. "Maybe not, but the police might be interested in your business model." The courtroom was silent except for the playback. Each word struck like a hammer, undeniable. By the time the recordings ended, the defendants no longer looked untouchable. They looked cornered. The defense tried to argue. They said the recordings were manipulated, that I was exaggerating, that my father's debt was real and I was just an emotional daughter spinning tales. But the jury had heard too much. Their eyes were sharp, skeptical of every denial. When it was Dad's turn to testify, my chest ached. He shuffled to the stand, eyes downcast. The defense asked him if he'd told them about the recordings. He whispered yes. When they asked why, his voice cracked. Because I was afraid. It should have softened me. It didn't. Fear wasn't an excuse for betrayal. The prosecutor pressed him. Do you acknowledge that your fear put your daughter at risk? His silence was louder than any confession. By the time closing arguments came, I was drained. My voice was gone. My body felt like stone. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't the scared girl waiting for midnight knocks anymore. I was the one shining a light on the darkness. The judge recessed for deliberation. Minutes crawled like hours. I sat with Ethan, his arm around me, watching the defendants whisper furiously with their lawyers. Then the jury filed back in. The foreperson stood, holding a slip of paper. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. On the charge of extortion, he read, we find the defendants guilty. The words rang like a bell. On the charge of coercion, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. The courtroom erupted. The tall one cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the table. The short one's smirk vanished completely. My father sank into his seat, covering his face with his hands. I sat frozen, tears welling in my eyes. Not because it was over. It wasn't. Not really. But because for the first time, I felt the weight lift. The truth had spoken louder than the threats. Do you know what it feels like when the nightmare finally cracks and daylight seeps in? That's what the courtroom felt like. Not perfect, not painless, but real. When the gavel struck one final time, I exhaled, a sound that felt like release. Ethan squeezed my hand. You did it, he whispered. And though exhaustion weighed me down, I managed a small smile. Because in that moment, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just survived their game. I'd rewritten the rules. The courtroom emptied slowly, like the air leaving a balloon after it's been stretched to its limit. People shuffled out, murmuring, their voices blending into the buzz of fluorescent lights. I stayed in my seat, my body too heavy to move. It was over, at least on paper. But inside the storm still rattled. Ethan leaned close. Come on, he whispered. Let's get out of here. We walked through the courthouse doors into the blinding Nevada sun. The world outside hadn't changed. Cars still honked, tourists still laughed, neon still promised fortunes no one would ever truly win. But for me, everything felt different. Reporters crowded near the steps, microphones thrust forward, questions flying. Marissa, how do you feel? Do you think this will stop them? What's next for you and your family? I froze, the swarm pressing in. Ethan put an arm around me, steering me past, shielding me. I didn't answer, not then, because how could I explain? That justice doesn't erase scars, that winning in court doesn't mean the fear vanishes at night. Back at Ethan's apartment, I collapsed on the couch. My phone buzzed nonstop, messages from classmates, co-workers, even strangers who'd heard. Some called me brave, some called me reckless. And in the middle of it all, a single text from my father. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't erase the betrayal, the nights I lay awake, the weight he shoved onto my shoulders. I didn't reply. Maybe one day, but not yet. Mom came by that evening. She hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. She cried into my shoulder, whispering, "You saved us?" But the truth gnawed at me. I hadn't saved us. I'd saved myself. And maybe that had to be enough. Do you know what it feels like when people call you a hero, but inside, you're just a survivor? That's where I stood, caught between the relief of victory and the ache of everything I'd lost. For weeks after, I jumped at every knock, every unexpected sound outside Ethan's apartment window. Even with the guilty verdict, I knew people like them had long shadows. You don't erase decades of power with a single ruling, but you can fracture it. And that fracture It was enough to let light in. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I went back to school, back to late-night diner shifts, back to routines that once felt meaningless, but now felt like proof I was still standing. Ethan was there through it all, quiet, steady, never letting me slip into the dark too far. The recordings stayed on my phone. I couldn't bring myself to delete them. They weren't just evidence anymore. They were a reminder that silence can be broken, that even in fear, you can choose to fight. Months later, I walked past the cafe where it all shifted. The chipped mugs, the soft jazz. It looked ordinary again. But for me, it would never just be a cafe. It was the place I decided my life wasn't theirs to own. I paused outside, watching strangers sip coffee, laugh, scroll their phones. They had no idea what battles had played out here, and maybe that was the point. Life goes on. But for me, it carried a new weight, a new clarity. I thought about my father, about how fear had driven him to betray me, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not forgiving, not yet, but the anger had loosened its grip. Because carrying it only kept me chained to the past. So I let it go just a little. When I finally sat down to write about it, my own words, my own account, I didn't write to relive the pain. I wrote so others might see themselves in the cracks, so they might know silence doesn't have to be the end. Because that's what this whole story had taught me. We don't get to choose the storms that find us, but we do get to choose how loudly we stand when they try to silence us. And me? I chose to turn the volume up. Do you know what it feels like when your scars start to look like strength? That's the aftermath. That's the resolve. I may never walk through life without shadows trailing behind me, but I walk anyway, head high, voice steady, no longer afraid of the knock at the door. Because I know now I am not for sale, not for 50,000, not for anything.